How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Emiliano Gonzalez here. And today, let's take a look now at the Model Zero, the fundamentals of React. And to make a quick recap of how do we get here, we need to thank out thanks to Josh Kamua. So shout out to Josh that allowed me to record his course. All right. And because we bought or I bought this combo CSS and React. Now I start with CSS to actually dive deep into this fundamental of CSS, and then now the fundamentals of React, and they're gonna make a quick recap here briefly, right? So first in the CSS, let me actually pull that up. Let me pull that up. Yep. CSS for JavaScript developers here. So this course is organized in 10 models, I think it is. Exactly. So this course is broken up into 10 models. So if we took now 3 days per model, right? That's roughly 30 days. So in other words, split that into 3 months. I will say that will be something adequate, 3 to 2 months. All right. So I think that that's the average in order to grasp that knowledge and then apply to what is really important. So yeah, 3 days per model. Okay. Because there is a lot of nuance in there, especially some English words and jargons and history that we need to look, as well as some edge cases. That's why I say, well, all right, 3 days. And if I split the 3 days per week, which means that, let's say you say, hey, let me break down this into this for you, which is this. So if we say that we took 1, 2, and 3 days, right? So 1, 2, and 3 days. Yeah, like 1, 2, and 3 days, roughly, roughly 3 days per week. All right. So if we say, hey, 3 days per week, that'll be, or in other words, a model per week. That means that, okay, makes sense. A model per week. That means that if it's 10 models, 10 weeks, exactly like 2.5 months. So that seems to me like a feasible time here. Yeah, absolutely. Or it can be even less than that. I will try to speed up a little bit. But the point of this is to we estimate to finish this course in the next 20 days. That'll be it won't happen. Each 3 days, all right, 3 days in each month. It means that is the next 30 days, roughly, all right, that it took. But specifically, instead of 3 days, we are going to split this into 1 model per week, which means 10 models, exactly, which is 10 weeks. All right. Something like that. Again, because there's a lot of nuances in there. So 10 weeks makes this like 2 months and a half, which is quite adequate. I must say, 2 months and a half, absolutely. July and August, and the end in mid September's. I think that's feasible. Very, very feasible. Very, very, very feasible. Absolutely. And also, I need to wrap up in other courses as well. One of them is the Vue, and the other is the JavaScript in React. So we have JavaScript, React, CSS, Vue, just like that, right? Full front end. Full front end. All right, good. So, so yeah, by the that's something I want to take note of this. All right, something I want to take note of this. Okay, because that's roughly how it should took us here. The same for the React. All right. Yeah, the same for the React, the course with React, followed by this. Yep, this is it. Let me put it this way here. I would like to start this, but that'll be later. Let me put it this way here. All right. So we got now 1.4, 1.5. I would like to dive into this, but there is a preference here. The preference is to end with this course, followed by the course of React, as well as the CSS. Oh, trust me. Trust me that the CSS. Trust me that the CSS. It needs to be done. It needs to be done. All right, especially here. This might be done after, not right now. So I will have is deep. I prefer to do this later on. I know there are priorities. The priority here is with React. Yeah, the priority here is with React, Vue, JavaScript, and CSS. Okay. This is the priorities here. That's right. So we got is this. So we hopefully finish this by August completely. Something roughly here. Exactly. Similar with the certificates. Exactly. Well, we're gonna start the certificate is here, so we expect it to end here. And this is something that we start with this in June. Similar to this and similar to this. Oh, now you think you're funny, right? This one, and then you got it, right? Here we get like 25% of the course. With this we have only 10%, all right, which is all right. Move on. Uh, yep, I will say that. I will say that. Mm-hmm. I think another important things to do uh, is the TypeScript. All right. It's most likely the TypeScript. I will love with the full stack here, but will be is with modern system design, TypeScript, and full stack application. Okay, for another 3 months. Good, good, good. Yeah, for another 3 months. Absolutely. For another 3 months. Okay. Exactly, for another 3 months. hmm But this is here and here. The same for all of this. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And similar for TypeScript. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, is this one? The full one. The full one. Exactly. Mm-hmm. I was a member of the X-State core team and work as a developer advocate at Verso. Interesting. I work with TypeScript as a lead full stack dev, a library maintainer, and now as a full-time educator. I built Total TypeScript to make the secrets of open source maintenance and industry expert available to everyone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, bro. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There we are. There we got it. That's right. That's right. All right. Cool. Cool. Completely, bro. Completely. Completely cool. Mm-hmm. 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 Of course. Of course. There you got it. Now, uh, yes. hmm All right. This is the CSS. Again, well, what I'm doing here is just to keep track is my consistency along the way. And then you got it. All right, cool. Now, yes, I want to make a quick recap here of this CSS model before we jump into what we really care, which is React. So the TLDR of this is to understand the intro to CSS, which is, well, what is CSS, how you can add style sheets, whether it is external or internal or inline. Also, you can is select is elements via the selectors, whether it is by tag or by class, and also the combinators, as well as the state-based classes, right, or pseudo selectors, whether it's something that we're gonna describe that a little bit later. So the other is the functions, which is another aspect, which is another part of the CSS anatomy. The functions, such as math. There's also something that we looked yesterday, which is cramp. I think it is from that, like clamp, all right, which is something that I didn't know that exists, and it is widely used, clamp, all right, where you say, hey, the clamp CSS functions clamps a middle value within a range of value between a defined minimum bound and maximum bound. The function takes three parameters: minimum value, a preferred value, and a maximum allowed. So the point of this is that you can use now as a way to indicate what is the min or max value that you want to apply to, right? So, but again, clamps, CSS function clamps a middle value within a range of value between a defined minimum bound and a maximum bound. The function takes three parameters: a minimum value, a preferred value, and a maximum value. So the idea here is for fluid typography, right? So not only that, is that you can also use for other type of stuff, you know, you can use for other properties, so for example like width and stuff like that. Again, we are looking is just at the basics of CSS to understand that function is one of them. For example, clamped translates, or all of these functions that we're looking here, you know, background colors, even HSL, RGB, all of these functions, rotate, scale, right? All of these functions from the CSS, right? And then we look at the add rules, which is indicating how CSS should be behaved. So for example, media, or layer, or import, or another add rules that we have to look at this. Like for example, font face. All right, a font face CSS add rule specify a custom font which you will font with which to display text. The font can be loaded either remotely in either a remote server or locally installed fonts on the user own computers. So here you can say is, hey, I want to indicate now the CSS to load this font, and this will be the name of this. All right. So for custom fonts, so the other for keyframes, import. All right, keyframes to indicate what is these several slides of each one of those animations frames. You also have media. You also have namescape. Uh, Another, which is something that we barely use, or now we're starting to use that, which is view transition. Again, it has limited support, so Firefox doesn't support that. All right. But in any case, it's quite important to know that that actually exists, similar to the char set. Which char set are we going to use? Is it UTF-8 or 16 and so on and so forth, right? Uh, Now, the other is the property shorthand. There's some couple properties, for example, like margin, padding, border, that help you to now indicate how it's going to look like these elements, or the particular portion that you want to add or remove, whether it's top, right, bottom, left. And last but not least, the comment. So what 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 Josh Komua, the founder of this course, and also and a company, he say, well, you know what? Um, Here we're gonna look at the most common things that, despite that there's a lot of tools out there that can help you to write CSS, this still are quite relevant, and even in 2025, right? So first is the understand the anatomy of a rule. All right, what is a rule, what is a selector, what is a declaration, the unit, all right, how you can identify each one of them. Then now the common tools that we still need to know that are relevant, for example, media queries, okay, that indicate when this particular rule will be applied, when the viewport is in a specific size. Also, the selectors, such as well, we look at the tag selector, the class selector, okay? And some common, despite that there is a lot of CSS frameworks or tools out there that help you to generate these identifiers, it's important that there are some of them that are still quite relevant despite too. Hover, so hover, focus, check, the first and last child, the first n type or the last n type, which is this, are now the common pseudo classes, and they are called like that because the state are managed internally by CSS. You don't have to worry about it, which is a great stuff. So you have now hover, as I mentioned before, the hover, focus. Why focus is still relevant? Because this is something that impact heavily on how you users that don't go with any pointer-like device, such as mouse, touch, provide now you accessibility or navigations to those assisting technologies by following its DWACG, which is the Web Accessibility Content Guidelines 2.1, which follow four principles. Hey, this must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? So the idea here is understand that this principle exists, the accessibility guidelines as well, and how you can rely in libraries. So for examples like call Axe, this npm Axe, right? npm Axe core is this one, all right? That this library is not a bulletproof, however, all right, It's not a bulletproof. However, it can give you the vast majority of the accessibility issues, right? With Xcover, you can find on average 57% of WCAG issues automatically. So, for those escape beyond that, we can take a look at the W WC WCAG 2.1, right? This is also something that was built by the Q, which is a company behind that provide now these accessibility tools, especially if you're going to build now applications, government applications, or the government wants to say, hey, this is a contract, right, that we want to do. How do we handle this, right? So yeah, this is one useful way to do that. Now, on that, and despite that, all right, then we also look at the pseudo elements such as the placeholder and before and after. This is useful for decoration most of the time. Before and after, and placeholder is still relevant to show is now how the format of a particular input the user must type on it. Now, then we look at the color, the huge Y, the dimension of color, or the universe of color. So again, because this is a more fundamental model, we look at the four type of colors. We have now the keyword for educational, the hexadecimal, the RGB, which is great for readability. But if you want some nuanced color, let's go to use now the HSL, which stands for hue, lightness, and saturation. What actually does hue mean in Spanish? All right, that's a very good question. Okay, hue is known as color or tone, or okay, hue, interesting, color. All right, bright huge, pastel huge. All right, I think this is a British. Yeah, okay, huge. British huge. So in any case, so the huge represents like a ring which contains all the colors. The saturations describe how grayed out or vibrant is a color, and the lightness represent is the purity of the color, the true mathematical color calculation. So 50% is the true color of that. Now we also look at the units. What is the M, root M, and percentage? That M stands, that's M, the value of M will be whatever is on the font size at that current element. Rem is the same, but instead of the current element, for the root element, the HTML. And why we use its percentage rather than pixels, again, something we're gonna see that later. And the range on the percentage, which is helpful to calculate, is the height, all right, as well as the aspect ratio of an image. Okay, so far so good, right? Because then we look at the typography, which is another huge topic. But first, font family is the topic that we care about this. So font family, which is a character, is describing is a multi-character set that says, for example, in the case of Roboto, we have now 6 type of font width, all right, and 2 variants, or AKA text formatting, italic and normal, right? So, because of that, now, So the idea here is to uh, look at those fonts, all right, uh, and understand that the fonts, it has now a particularly format, whether it's sans serif or serif. And sans serif is something that has some grace. It comes from the French word, all right. And the serif is doesn't have any grace. Now, because most of the time OS contain all of this built-in font family that we can have access. So, for example, Tahoma, Arial, Times New Roman, so on and so forth. Most applications and CEOs and VC actually wants to give now a custom or a tailored experience to each one of them. So what do we need to do and how to do that, right? Well, it turns out that we can use this called web fonts, which is, for example, in the case of Airbnb, is using an in-house design font called Cerealial that give this aspect of the Airbnb, which is good. All right. And the idea here is to look now how can we import web fonts, whether it's a CDN or Google APIs, and then notify to your document how you can make use of this by importing first is the CSS, and then on this by importing is the external style sheet, and then indicating at the CSS the font family you want to go with, all right, or defining this custom font family as well using the font face, all right. Hey, I want you to import this font that I have locally or perhaps in another server, and I want to now make that available, right, in the font family. All right. So we also look at the different types of fonts or the fonts formatting, whether it's the bold to indicate that something is important, italic, where you need to in-person communications provide or there is a lot of clues in in-person communications that cannot be described verbally. So italic help us to describe those kind of scenarios. So for example is the thought of a character or the TV or book or series, perhaps a foreign language. Also, when some scientific papers or some scientific phrase or words is being used, so for example, Homo sapiens, when you want to grab that text or when you are quoting from another text, is another one. We also look at the underline text, which is to indicate this is only for the web. You're not going to see that on books. Underline link is to indicate that this, it involves an action. This is an hyperlink. And then we look at the other semantic tags like M and the the M, the erm, as well as the strong, right? And why this is useful? Because this assistant technology use those tags. When they read that, they now emphasis on the code. All right, so okay, now After that, we also look at the text, all right? And by the text is this thing called, uh, the text alignment, the text transformation to uppercase, lowercase, as well as the text spacing, all right? Line height or letter spacing. So that's just to describe is the fundamental of the CSS, all right? By first walking through the anatomy and then the media, then the selectors, then the color and the unit as well as the typography, all right? So something that we can take a look at this, media query, selectors, so combinators, color, units, and typography. All right. With this is just to describe is the fundamental stuff that you need to know in CSS. All right. And then finally to the React here with React is to once we know that, because Josh Comego actually mentioned that it is quite important to back and forward from one model to another as a way to reinforce your learning. Here with the React, we first look at what is the magic of React. Okay, this particular course is not that huge, all right? It has now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 10 models. All right. It has now 10 models, which is great. All right. We're now the first model. All right. I mean 10 models that actually is made of huge content. All right. Where now the first model is the React. Okay. The fundamental is to walk through the history of React. So why React is the magic of React, as he mentioned. And because React has a particularly, because it all started with Facebook with that particular problem when they have to solve that notification issue in their UI, and because when user click that to see now if they have the emails, they're not, all right? So the point here is that with each one of them, this issue repeat itself as new features needs to be released, and not only that, also that some bug fix needs to be done, and this bug continuously to appear. So it was like a whack-a-mole tried to know and to fix this issue. So they now develop is an internal tool called React that say, hey, because the problem that you have is that each one of them has each UI has a state internally, and now you have to manage that say internally because they are not syncing each other. That's what you have now, this particular problem. So this tool, what it does is to let me now internally manage the state of our application, okay, of our UI elements. So I'm going to keep sync is the state and the UI, right? At the bare minimal level, which is the UI, it makes a lot of sense. And as your application grows and scale, it makes much more sense to let now the JavaScript code, React, at the end of the day, manage your state across different UI elements, all right, and share that amongst them. So perhaps you might need to define some high-level state or some state that are shared by all components, All right, and this is when things started to scale that up, and why we have, for example, frameworks like Vue or Angular, alternative, especially Vue and Svelte, and you name it, where they say, hey, let me now is manage is the state for you, so you don't have to worry about to when a dependency is changed, or if you need, yeah, let me manage for you is the state management, as well as yeah, let me manage the state for you, as well as it is dependency. All right, and I'm going to do the best, I'm going to do my best for letting those UI to be rendered when they are needed. All right, so you don't have to worry about using Vue and yada yada and so on and so forth. Now, it turns out that you need to know JavaScript first of all, and here this course focus is on React, specifically what is the change of this React 19, and how it introduced. You can think of these three main areas, three buckets. First is the minor changes that they made to improve the user experience. The other is the stabilization of the server components, as well as the introduction of the Action API, which is the new way of how you can handle forms with Next 5.15. All right, and how Next has become is the framework de facto that, well, is going to develop all of these features in React, as well as providing is the different rendering modes, right? Server-side rendering, exactly, or single-page applications, you name it, right? But what we really care about here is how do we create our own React, okay? And what React is doing behind the scenes. Since with React, at the end of the day, by looking is at the React, which is the surface, the developer API, developer surface API, and the React renders, whether it's on the web, React DOM, or which is one of the things that I really love about React, you know. But again, whether it's the React DOM, the React Native for the mobile area, as well as the React 3 Fiber, so you can render now using WebL3, WebGL, and 3GS. All right, so every platform has their own primitive, which say for the web you have the div, the input, yada yada. For React Native, you have now the text, the touchable, the pressable, and so on, right? For the React 3 Fibers, we have primitives, even a little bit more wild, like lights, geometry, materials, in camera. I think we put it here, and camera. And camera, all right. And this is actually a great stuff, terrific stuff, because now you can, with one tool, can develop in different platforms. So we also look at what the heck is a DOM anyway, which is the structure of how now the browser is internal representation of the document, where now the browser exposed, so you can have access to each one of those elements and apply some rules and some animations and so on and so forth. Now, we also look at how can we create our own React, all right? And I think that's quite interesting. And how by the end of the day, now React element is just creating is a simple JavaScript object that contains the type, which the more relevant property here is the type, the props, uh, as well as the key and ref. Okay, so now you can see here, and now how you can is render your own like that. So here we look at how can we build our own React element, right? So by receiving now this particular object in this shape, all right, which is the type and the props and the children, and children is a valid property of any HTML element, mind blowing stuff, all right. Here what we're going to do is to create now an element using the document create element, all right, and then set the attributes to that, and last but not least is the content to it, using it as a text content for that, right, element text content for that, and then return that element or append that element that you create to the DOM, to the element that you look at the DOM, which is the root. So this was quite interesting. So because as you can imagine that if you're building now all of these elements, it's quite tedious to write each one of these React, dot create elements, so on and so forth, yada and yada, and again and again and again and again and again. That you say, well, let me, okay, let me is find a way to make this less tedious. And this is when we have now GSX, right? So GSX is specifically designed to now write JavaScript or this component in a JavaScript-ish HTML syntax, okay? Where the idea here is by writing this in an HTML or GSX like, all right? This code, when it's going to be evaluated, it will be transpiled into JavaScript code. So why this is important, and why what the transpilation word means here? Well, transpilation here is just the word that we need to know is the transpilation and compilation. Transpilation is in a computer science is, well, how do you is the process of transforming from one high-level language to another one, whether it's JavaScript to Python or Python to Ruby, all right? Whereas compile is from one high-level language to a low machine code, all right? In our case, we can use that indistinguishably, compile and transpile. But I mention here because the way of how now this is being evaluated, all right, especially when you write this kind of code, is that the library in itself, React, also is going to evaluate or run is the GSX process. This is one of the reasons why when you look at stuff like this, it can be quite confusing. And why we use, for example, tools like Babel and stuff like that, because we have now a transpiler. React in itself has a built-in transpiler that is going to, and I would like to analyze that. Inside of it have a GSX transpiler. When we run code like this, yeah, when we run code like this, come on, chill. So the transpilation is handled by a separate tool like Babel here, transpiler compiler, or SWC faster alternative. Build tools like Vite and Webpack or Pulsar that include this transpiler. When you run this code, you need one of these transpiler in order to build process, your build process. A popular study included the React app, use Babel under the hood, Next.js, use WC, which is now run on Rust, Vite, which use ESBuild, is using now Go, all right. Manual Babel setup, React itself just provided create element functions and rendering logic. The GSX JavaScript transformations happen before React even sees, before React ever see your code, typically during a build step. So now this process or that phase, okay, is that this file needs to be first transpiled into a JavaScript code by a transpiler, whether it is with Babel or SWC or Babel or FWC or TypeScript or even ESBuild, all right? They need to be used that. And what's more, exactly. And what's more, okay. And what's more is that that particular code is transpiled to this, and then the browser has JavaScript code that can understand it. So why this is important? Because a lot of people, when they see that, they think this is using model GSS transformer. It will compile into this, right? So GSX is a fancy optimized version of the React.create element, and it includes some shortcuts and so on and so forth. Here we are looking now at the understanding GSX. And first is the compilation files, the transpiling and the compilation. What is GSX? What is doing GSX? What are the tools that we can use with GSX? And then now the anatomy of the GSX, which is the expression slots. All right, you are now injecting to GSX this particularly JavaScript expression. There is a difference between a statement and an expression, where now JavaScript expressions are the what do you call it? JavaScript expressions, right? Are the So JavaScript expressions are anything that produces a value, where now a statement is a call to action. All right. So we look at several examples of what is a statement and what is an expression. So this is an entire statement, and here is an expression slot. This is an expression slot. Here's an start statement. So whether it is by assigning a variable, by returning something of a function, by looping through something, and the other is by evaluating now an expression. All right, this is another statement. So this is quite interesting, because with this we look at how can we now create or pass dynamic data to our template, followed by the comment, and then how you can now passing its attributes to that, how the attribute is being described in the on the tag as the attributes. Yeah, how the attribute is being described to that. Yeah, the attribute. the attributes in the special cases here. The attributes, the special cases of those attributes, all right, or the attributes and the type coercion inside of that. Again, we're looking here at the understanding GSX, all right? What it is, where it comes from, what are the tools that allow us to use that, what is the value proposition of GSX, understanding is a compiler and transpiler, what is an expression slot, what are the comments and the attributes, expressions here, and how that now is converted when you transpile that into this JavaScript object produced by React create element, and the difference between the GSX and the HTML. All right, where first is the reserve keyword you have now is the HTML4 for labels, and the HTML4 for label, the class to class name, the self-closing tag, the case-sensitive tag, the case-sensitive attributes, the corner cases of those attributes, which is for area and data. All right. Some particularly good example and exercise to look at that, which is fix the converter, the white space gotcha, and how you can now add space to that. And remember that at the end of the day, what you're doing is creating is the content. What you're doing is with GSX is creating individual elements on that via the create React element, and generate is now an object that is going to be populate that, right? So the idea here is to get yourself familiar with the process of the React create element, right? And how now GSX convert all of those tags into this JavaScript code, which is the reason, all right? Which is the reason to look at the difference between GSX and the template, where now, since GSS, what it does is to transpile this markup language into a JavaScript, all the logic is being handled by the JavaScript. So we can take the benefit of, for example, filter or includes or sort, whereas with a template language like Blade or Liquid, you have to learn its own custom small behaviors to handle those logic, right? So for example, conditional logic and custom stuff. Now, we also look at the componentization or the approach of how you can now create this particularly user interface, where back in the old days, or instead of organizing this in via their HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all right, with the structure, the style, and the logic, all of them are bundled together. That control is a specific UI element, right? So with this mindset, all right, which to me is quite interesting to explore here, all right, we also look at the mechanism of reuse. So HTML doesn't have a native mechanism of reuse, so we have now this called partials. And CSS, the main mechanism of reuse is CSS class, whereas the JavaScript, the main reusable mechanism is functions. In React, the main reusable mechanism is the component, similar to Vue. And if you want to now reuse is the logic, you have now hooks, pretty much like the composition API in view 3, right? When you have now this place where you put to reuse all of this logic. In fact, there is a particular library that allows you to detect all of this. It's called vuse, right? You can just do that to, it's a collection of view composition utilities that you might or not need it, depend on your use case, all right? But if you're starting to use some of this, well, you might see the benefits on that, right? The only trade-off is that somebody will have to keep up the pace and maintain that. So hopefully you use this with careful, right? Hopefully you use that with careful, because what is doing all of these particular hooks is to say, hey, given specific platform or elements or states, I want to have now a logic to attach myself to that, right? So views as a collection of utility function based on the composition API. So we assume you are already familiar with the basic of the composition API, which is this reusable logic, okay, that we want to go with. So for example, it's like, hey, if I want to have access to, I can now have a particular custom hook to say, hey, get me is that, or create use global, or create an injection state, or inject local, provide local, use async state, right? Use the bound ref history, last change. So all of this is reusable logic that you're gonna get from that, right? Is reusable logic that you're gonna get from that, right? Similar for the elements, and again, some most common of them, reside observer, which is great pattern. The other is the browser for Bluetooth, CSS bar, dark, you name it. Okay, you get the idea here. On click outside, on element removal, as well as the sensor, the network, you can use as a use fetch to actually is wrap that into its own particular object, as you can see here, like use fetch. All right, it's gonna give you now these properties or states that you can listen to. All right, anytime the URL change, well, you're going to get this. Also, you have now, you can put that into an asynchronous use. All right, so anytime that the URL change, you know what you gotta do, so on, so forth. Good. Now, with that, all right, with that, the idea is that looking at the difference or in the component, what is a component and what is the mechanism of reusable or reusability, and why this is important is because this is a common pattern across the entire software industry. So we also look at thinking in components, okay? So how you can now organize is all of your component when it comes to design each one of them. Anytime that you give now a design, you can start it from the top up to the bottom and so on and so forth, right? We actually do some couple exercise to do that, right? From the design, you say, hey, this will be now all the headers, and inside of the header you will have now a search input, and the hamburger, and the category here, and some of this might be called is a content. Okay, what inside of the content you're gonna have is now the business work or the category render, right? So you have another components here, which is the idea here is to identify is the minimal bare component, because if you do this, you will now understand that the more you relying on HTML, the better off will be for you, because you are not creating is an element here. You're not creating is an object. You're not reserving space in memory for that. So here we can create perhaps or we can recreate that in a CSS. All right. Perhaps we can have now an another for icon and the avatar. All right. This might be a form component. All right. And here we have now the gallery of how this is going to be shown. But the idea here is to recognize why this is important for us to not create a lot of React components, because especially this is bad for performance. Okay? Bad for performance. Bad for performance. Bad for performance. Also, we look at the arrow functions versus traditional functions here. The big component rule. I think the basic syntax, right? As a way to, well, understand what's going on here. And if you're using now a transpiler like GSX, well, you say, okay, good. I want to now take or transform this friendly greeting, all right, into now an object, or in this case into a create element that is going to contain is now a paragraph, where the properties will be now a style for here. Here we're passing now a style for this. This is the reason why passing is here. And followed by the children like this. All right. So the arrow versus traditional functions. I'll prefer to use the function rather than the arrow, especially for debuggability. Mainly for that. That's the main reason why I'm doing that. Right? That's the main reason why we're doing that. Now, let's finally jump into what we really care in the exercise. Okay, so we went through props and children props. Otherwise you won't. Well, at least in my case. All right, here we are. We look at the props, the children prop. All right. Basic syntax. Here we are on the props. Okay. Exactly the props. So far our friendly greeting component is kind of cool, but isn't terribly useful. Every time we render friendly, we get the exact same results as it is. So that's what it is. When I taught React at a local coding bootcamp, props were a common stumbling block. Exactly. So so if we want to pass now blocks, or if we want to pass down some, or if we want to render dynamic data, okay. So if we want to render dynamic data, we can use props. All right. So we can use props. All right. When I thought, if you feel discouraged for not getting it right, however, please know that isn't a normal feel that way. It is normal to feel that way, and you can always ask questions in our community Discord. It's interesting that they actually force this. It is normal to feel that way. And I think because there is a lot of expectation. I think it's because there is a lot of expectation for you. You know, there is a lot of expectation for you to know or to don't know. In this video, we use the structuring assignment to extract prop from the function parameter. If you haven't seen the 6 step before, I encourage you to look at the object structuring. I am quite familiar with that. Okay, the structuring function parameters like this. Parameter destructuring. That's right as well. All of these three code snippets are equivalent. Many developers enjoy using function parameter destructuring. It is especially popular in React to destructure the props in our component. We also look at the track section here, name argument. Renaming function parameters. And default parameters values. Gotcha. Argument must be provided here. Let's suppose we add this. Here's the problem. We're destructuring the method and entry num property from an object, but when we call the same API function, we're not providing an object. Here's another example of the same issue. Uncaught type error cannot read property of undefined reading methods. It's interesting. Here's another example of the same issue, which might take it clearly. Function same API property. Property is undefined, so we'll get the same error when we try and extract values from it. So we get now the cons, the method, the number of retry from properties. There's another one. Property is undefined, and so we'll get the same error when we try and extract values from it. To solve these problems, we can set a default value for the first parameter, the object we are destructuring from. When we call setAPI without passing in any arguments, the first parameter gets initialized to an empty object. Then the method and number of retries properties are initialized using their default values. Since they weren't defined in that empty object, this stuff gets pretty complex, and you certainly don't need to take advantage of all of this modern syntax. I just want to let you know that this is an issue that you might run into. Okay. So we're using is now object destruction. Okay. So here we are we are so here we are going to use object destruction, right? I prefer to put it in italic. Object destruction. What about this? Without the ball. Object destruction. Now, object destruction. Object destruction is a topic in itself. Alright? So object destructuring offers a sleek way to extract some variables from an object. Okay? Offer a sleek way. A sleek. What in the F is a sleek? British. Smooth. Shiny and lying close to the body, and therefore looking well cared for, not untitty and with no part sticking out. Oh, okay, sleek, smooth, interesting. Okay, so this allow us to, okay, so this offers a sleek way to destructuring. Okay, this offers a sleek way to destructuring, or a sleek way to extract some variable from an object, to extract some properties from an object. Okay, this offers a sleek way to extract some property from an object, and this is using this, right? You define now a user object, okay, and here you say something like this. So hey, I want you to get me is these two properties from this object, or these two keys from this object. Okay, Francois Bouchard in Canada. I don't know who the French told is Francois Bouchard. Who is Francois Bouchard? French army officer. Okay. Francois Bouchard. Okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Very okay. Well, Francois Bouchard. François. Monsieur. Oh my god. Well, this is America. Samia Mia. Well, I don't know who is this François Bouchard. I don't know. But it is man. François Bouchard. Good. Province Quebec and country Canada. Postal code. Who the fuck is this fella, man, that you put in here? I think this is some. Oh, okay, it's like Matias. Oh, okay, it's like Matias in Argentina, or Huilesca in Venezuela. You know. Saint Louis du Haha. What? Is this a real location? Is this a real location? Saint Louis du Haha. Huh? Where is this, bro? If I go to find it in Google Maps, Saint Louis What the French toast, man? San Luis do haha. Holy shit. Alright. Alright. Main. Interesting. What the fuck is this? This is. What the French toast is this, man? St. Louis du Hal. Ha. 17 degree. Ooh, that's beautiful. Summertime. Summertime. Centre de Ben. Okay. That location. Oh, okay. It's a residency. Okay. 4 years ago. Ah, it's just in French. Holy fuck. Holy fuck. Holy fuck. Residences. God damn, look at this. There's no even there's no even people have their car like that. What the fuck is it? People have their car like that. Oh my god. What the French toast? Holy moly. Oh fuck. Yeah, nigga, what is this, man? This doesn't look like even it is real anymore. Oh, I think it's this. Okay. Uh, this is like provincia. Wow, that was a beautiful day. Holy fuck. It was a beautiful day, man. It's a beautiful day. Very beautiful day. Wow, how that changed. It changed so fast. It's like, eh. It was a beautiful day, nigga. No. June 2024. That's mind blowing. People have their stuff parking there like that. Holy fuck. Oh my god. Of course, this is. Anyway. Holy fuck. That's mind blowing, bro. Oh, look, a partner, a couple here. Yeah, oh, I get it. Avis aux utilitaris. I think this is the place. Centre de Jeu. It's two women here, working here. And then you got it here. They still looking, right? No, sit down. They sit and relax. Okay, this is the place. Okay, that's. All right. Ooh, good. Jesus, that lovely play in Canada. Saint Louis du haha. Anyway, so this is object destructuring. It offers a sleek way to extract property of an object. Sleek way to extract property of an object. All right. Remaining extracted values. So this is effectively the same thing as doing this, right? renaming extracting values. So renaming extracting values. This is more like a subtopic here. So I am quite familiar to that. Actually, not that much. On syntax errors, identifier name has already been declared. So you can, for example, here do that. User name. Exactly. Renaming extracting values. Consider the situation. Exactly. Consider this situation when you have this. So the point of this is to say, well, this one followed by this one. So consider this situation. No. Consider this situation. The thing here is that we're trying to destructure a name property into its own variable, but we run into this issue. In this case, we can rename that into a new value here. Okay? That the name will be is username. Alright? Oh, sorry. Where now the name will be is this. As it is. Right? So we're trying to destructure a name property that already exists into its own variable, but there is already a variable called name. So in this case, we unpack this by saying, hey, I want to reassign or renaming extracted value that'll be called now this username. This is why React is heavily bet on JavaScript. So we got this. All right. The other is the default values. So default values, renaming extracted object, the default values. Okay, here's a question. What happens is we're trying to destructure a key from an object which isn't defined. Good question. All right. Well, it's gonna give us now an undefined, of course. This will give us is undefined. Yeah, this will give us is undefined. But the user status isn't defined, and so status will be set to undefined. If we want, we can set the default value using the assign parameter here. That's also interesting here. So with default values, by extracting or using the object destructuring, we can also, right? We can also is destructuring the values and assigning default values. Right? If we don't pass any value to this, all right, or if that property is not present, let's going to now add this as it is. All right. If the user object has a status property, that value will be plugged out and assigned to a new status constant. Otherwise, status will be assigned to the string idle. In other words, it is a modern version of this. It's interesting. So if that exists, all right. Or if that is nullish, all right, let's go to do this. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. All right. The other is the structuring function parameters. So far we have looked at the object destructuring is renaming extracted variable default values in the structuring function parameters. This is something that I'm quite familiar with. All right. Let's suppose we have a function which takes an object as its first parameter, an object as its first parameter, like this. Type of that user.name. If this is different in a string, return false. If the user password is .length is minus than 12, returns now false. Otherwise, return true, right? If we want, we could destructure these values at the top of the function. This validate function is quite silly, but very important, especially if you want to define some basic stuff. Basic stuff. All right, like a validator here. Like a validator here. All right, like a validator here. Hey, if the type of his user.name is different to a string, all right. Hey, return this is false. If the password.length is less than 12, returns now false. Otherwise, return true. So if we want, we could destructure these values at the top of a function and make use of them. Using parameter destructuring, we can do this destructuring right in the function parameter as well. We can either do this exactly. We can either do this using this destructuring function parameters. This will look like this. Using parameter destructuring. Or we could destructure, exactly. We could destructuring like this, or using parameter destructuring. Now I get it why React is so heavily, or using parameter destructuring. Using parameter structure. Now I get why this is so heavily. I get it, bro. I completely get it, man. And a lot of this now, people out there are looking for people that can now is tell me what went wrong with my app. When the vibe coding ends, there will be a lot of people out of business or looking find ways to see how they fix that shit. You have this. All of these three code snippets are equivalent, but many developers enjoy using parameter destructuring, especially popular in React, to destructure the props in our components. If those props doesn't exist, if one of those props doesn't exist, we're gonna get that, and therefore check it. One of the things that I want to brought that out here is that because we are receiving this as a reference, I'll prefer to create now a like this. I prefer to do this. Honestly, I prefer to do this because this is now less error prone. In what does it mean? By now, well, at the end of the day, you are destructuring this. So you are creating now these variables locally here. All right. And since we are not, okay, it's because these validations actually return something. But if for some reason you are doing or handling is procedures, all right, that's when things can bite you in the ass. Most of the time we're gonna see that. Name argument. JavaScript doesn't have this feature. As a result, it can be difficult to understand what role different argument played. For example, suppose you're working on a code base and you stumble upon this. Why does this function receive 5 and null? It is totally mysterious. You need to hunt down like where this function is defined to understand what these values are. And suppose though that track season took an object and it is only argument that look like this. By supplying an object, we effectively have a label to each value. This works quite a lot like a name argument in other language. When I write a function, I will often use parameter destructuring, specify so far so that I can pass an object in rather than a bunch of individual arguments. That way it is easy to understand what it provides to. So yeah, name argument. And then you have now renaming function parameters. Renaming function parameters. Renaming functions parameters. Oh, So for example, like this, early in this lesson, we saw to use the destructuring to rename the newly created variable, right? Name and username. Nice. A bit of symmetry here is that we can also do this with function parameters. Okay, we can also is renaming functions parameters. That's interesting. We can also rename function parameters. Again, it's heavily rely on JavaScript nature. Is heavily relying on JavaScript nature, bro. Is heavily relying on the JavaScript nature. Exactly. But then we look now at this, which is something that we can do here. We can also is rename those values. We can is rename those values. We can is rename those values here. Similar to this. This is one of the reasons why I'm not so familiar with. But React must do. Is heavily do. This is pretty nice things, but it can come in handy. In React component, need to start with capital letter and to convert lowercase props. Here's a quick preview from Model 4. Exactly. So if you take a look at this, all right, and then you say, hey, renames the icon prop so that it is accessed as icon within the component. You get is this function icon button, exactly, and then you can rename that. And then you can have access to. Rename icons prop is an access as an icon within the component. Exactly, we are renaming parameter function. Renaming functions parameter here. And the other is the default parameter values. Well, I am quite familiar with this. There is a reason why this was created as well, as you can imagine. So not only this, but you have to be careful because the nullish errors can happen too. Let's suppose we add a default value for both of the property in our function. When we call this function without specifying an argument, since we want to store all of the default values, unfortunately we get an error like this. Here's the problem. We're destructuring the methods exactly of something that we haven't passed through, that we're not providing an object. And here's another example of the same issue, which might make it clearly. So property here's property is undefined, but that's right. Uncaught type error cannot read property of undefined reading methods. So the way of how you can solve this is by actually defining an empty object for that. Okay. This stuff gets pretty complex. You certainly don't need to take advantage of all of this modern syntax. I just want to let you know that this is an issue you might run into. Exactly. This is an issue you might go into. Gotcha. Argument must provide with the default parameters value, which is this. The default parameters values. When I call this function, I provide this. Alright? So when I call these functions, I can supply this. I can supply my own methods as it is. But or if I want to be equal to get that, I can even omit that. Send API requests, like so. So gotcha. Argument must be provided. Let's suppose we add default values for both of the property in our function, right? So gotcha argument must provide here. Exactly. So function here. So let's suppose you have now this. One way to solve that is to now passing is a specific object to that. Passing in a specific or initialize that with a specific empty object here to handle those values. This is one of the reasons why they ask you all of these hard questions. It's because, man, the problems we are facing, all right, is not for everybody. And you definitely must know what in the F you are doing. Okay, you must definitely know what in the F you are doing, bro. you must definitely know, you must definitely be the person to know, to go. Hmm. Absolutely, man. Absolutely, bro. Absolutely, bro. Absolutely, bro. Absolutely, bro. Abso-freaking-lovely, bro. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, this is part of the gotcha on props, which is a long list of stuff that we need to look at this. This is not just only is about the props. Hey, this is pretty much like the stream. Okay, so with props, which is the way of how you can pass here, we take advantage of the object destructuring, all right, which allows us to um, uh, conveniently pull out a, or it allows slickly, right, smoothly pull out a property in from an object, all right. So we can now is have renaming extracted values, default values, all right. So for example, like this. Okay, renaming extracted value, default value. My question is that can we do something like this? All right. Renaming extraction values and default values, right? Where you say, uh, let me put it here like this. Say name one, all right. You say no default. So if I do something like this about the name one, I mean is the username, all right? It's gonna give me default. Holy fuck, good. So you can now not only renaming extracting variables, but also assign some default value and destruction function parameters, which is something that I'm quite familiar with. And I will prefer to create that. Okay, because once you get in here, it's going to take a look at that. It's the same as the other one, right? Uh, renaming function, okay, renaming function parameters, which is you can also is renaming is the parameters, functions parameters, as well as the default parameter values. So whether it's renaming extracted variables and assign default values, as well as destructuring function parameters, rename them and assign default values to them. Holy moly, that's great. That's great. So here's what we talk about the default values, right? Exactly. And we talk about is the default values here. We also have to be careful about using this because so for example, you do something like this, yeah. Let's say you define this as 100 pixels, right? And we want this just to console log that size, right? Say size. However, if we call now horizontal here, horizontal rule, all right, and we pass an object with the size here of 20 pixels, right? 20 pixels. Exactly. 20 pixels. Invalid unexpected token. Size 20 pixels. All right. All right. However, if you say horizontal rule, and then you now pass an empty object, it's supposed to assign that default value, which is great. But if you pass now null here for some reason, let's say now null, all right, it say, hey, I throw an error, okay, I couldn't find any of this value, but if that value size that you pass size is null, unfortunately it's going to print that out with null. So the TLDR of this is that despite that this assigned value you can pass here, all right, you must verify that that is not a null value, unfortunately. Okay, the thing is that we need to is verify that we don't pass any default value or nullish collisions here. Exactly. If you haven't seen this Gurifellas, it is very similar to the double, but it only guard against nullish values, null and undefined, and it means we don't have to worry about surprising falsy values like 0. Ultimately though, I prefer to use the default value approach when it comes to React props like this. In fact, we have to be careful about these default values, all right, especially with the object destructuring. Exactly, object destructuring in default values So because there is a particular thing here, so any time you define a variable, anytime you define a default parameter value, all right, in a function, it is important to put another gar. All right, it is important to put another gar there. Do this scenario. Imagine the function like this. And this is scenario. This is scenario. This scenario. Due to this is scenario. All right. You have this function and you got this size, right? It's gonna bring that out size as 20, right? So 20 pixels. So far so good. What happened if for some reason we pass a size of null value? And here we go. What happens if for some reason we pass a size of null values? Unfortunately, it's gonna print that null. So so to prevent this behavior, it is also recommended to put a guard on top of that, right? Or use the knowledge coalition, right? Or use a knowledge coalition, which is, in other words, it's a something like this. If this is size or not, I want you to show size. All right. Show size or this default value. So despite that, even that you pass now something as null, all right, despite that you might pass even something as null, well, what do you think that will be the output? It is that expected value. So this is important to safeguard yourself from null values that are being passed in there, and then you want to render that. All right. Or you want to also pass some default computations. This is the reason why we have this knowledge coalition. This is the reason why we have the knowledge coalition. Makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And then we look at the children props. Okay. The children props. Let's suppose that we are building a custom built button component. It should look like this, right? And you want to pass now the content. So here we're going to render is now the content. So here we are saying, hey, I want you to create is a React create element of this button as a of this object that the object here is now is a type, and the type, the attribute will be inside of the props in there, or the type here, and then on the children's it will render now is the content here, all right, and that'll be all, right? So don't click me. This word, but it feels funny, doesn't it? It's quite different from how we used to typically HTML button, where the content goes in between the open and close tag, like this. It is a nice syntactic sugar where React led us to do the same thing with our common custom components. When we do this, we can access the children through the children props. Follow on like this. And this is the quality of life that React does for us. When we pass something between the open and close tag, okay. So if you want to now render something pretty much like an HTML, the children props, well, this is something that now React allow us to render as it is. This is a quality of life thing that React does for us. When we pass something between the open and closed tag, React will automatically supply that value to us as children. And if and then if you examine the children, it is a property that exists in HTML. All right, like this. The type, the key, the props. This element has been parsed to this, the hello world. Okay, you want to now do this, I think, and this is restore. Okay, like this. Format code. Reset code. Okay. So as you can see here, when we render this again, here we're gonna get that this is an object after the transpilation, or after the transpilation. All right, this is an object that contains the type, the key, the props, with all of these props that you have here, the children's and hello world. My question is that if I look at the difference with this, or the expression is lot here, the attribute slot. This is the equivalent to compile this. And if you pass now, for example, the attributes. You know, where each one of those elements will be converted into a create React element that'll be of the article, the props, all right, and as you can see is this. That'll be contained is the props, and inside of the prop it will have now the style, the children, and as it is, bro. Okay, so this is the actual object that React create element exactly is doing. So pretty much like this. So here, exactly. So the children props is now give us the ability to, similar like the HTML actually works, okay? Similar like that, now we can is pass data as it is, and we can have access this dynamic data, or data that we receive inside of the tag, via the children props, of course. via the children props. Oh my god, okay. Via the children props. So not only is the content in itself, but also is any other element that was created down there. Mhm. Any other element that here is being rendered here. That's why, for example, is provider. Okay. That's why provider, and when you use context, you need to pass is the children to that, because what you're doing is to create now a wrapper, or it's like you putting now a div on top of all of that content, all right? And with children, you just want to let the content pass through that, right? Mhm. This is quite important to understand deeply. Very important to understand that. Children is a special value, a reserved word when it comes to props. But it's not that special, and I think a lot of newcomers to React think that children is somehow distinct of different from other props. In fact, it is exactly the same. If we want, we could pass children in the traditional way. It is clunky, but outcome is the same. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting. Hmm. That children prop, bro. That children prop. The children props. Alright? The children props. Holy moly. So you can render content as it is in there. For example, you say this and say children, I want you to have this as hello world, right? It's quite strange, but you can do that. Oh, because it's JavaScript. Console log this. Yeah, this is if you want to render this. Yeah, this is if you want to render this. Let's say, I think this is an embedded. They're using that some embedded here. If this actually have some count exactly. It's an embedded canvas here. That's interesting. That is rendering a canvas here. That's mind blowing. That's mind blowing. That is rendering is a canvas, bro. Okay, so everything here is a canvas. So every page is a canvas. Go ahead. To prevent an injection there. RTL. But again, you can now render that thing, bro. So the children props. Okay, let's suppose that we're building a custom button component. Okay, so let's suppose that we are building a custom button component. Okay, so it should look and act just like a regular HTML button. So it should look and act just like a regular HTML button. Right? But it should have a red background and white text. But it should have a red, okay, but it should have a red background and a white text. Okay, cool. So we could write it like this. So function red button blah 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 blah. And then we use like this. And this is how we can use this component. So this works, but this works, but it is kind of funny, but it feels a bit funny. But it feels a bit funny, doesn't it? But it feels a bit funny, doesn't it? Doesn't it? It is quite different from how we use a typical HTML button. That all started there. It is quite different of how do we use a typical HTML button where the content goes between typical HTML button where the content gets between, where the content goes in between the markup, or the open and close tag, right? Such as this, a typical HTML button. So wouldn't it be nice to do that? As a nice bit of syntax sugar, React let us do the same thing with our custom components. So React let us do the same thing with a bit of syntactic sugar. Okay, so React let us do the same thing with our custom components. So React let us do the same thing with a bit of syntactic sugar for our custom component, which is this root render. So we do this by accessing the children through the children props. Okay, so by accessing the children props here. So when we wrote our components, all right, which is our JavaScript function, we say, hey, I want to get this. So JavaScript or React now allow us to have access to this prop, which is the children, that is allowing us to any content inside of the opening and the closing tag, we can now is render through. Okay. So for example, when we inspect the code, all right, so when we inspect the code, or when we inspect this code, we get this. We got this. Children is a special value, a reserved word when it comes to props. but it's not that special. I think a lot of newcomers to React think that it is. But it's not that special. Exactly, but it's not that special. So it is exactly the same here. These are the equivalents of this. But it's a bit odd to do that. Also, and so we're giving a bit of syntax to make GSX feel more like HTML. But fundamentally, the children prop is the same as any other props. There is nothing special or magical about it. What if both, right? Exactly. So what if both? Exactly. What if both? What happens if we pass both forms on the children props? So, well, let's take a look at this particular code and what gets rendered. So if we take a look now at this code, right? So as you can see, the browser gives preference to that. The browser gives preference to that. The browser gives preference to whatever is in between the closing and between the open and close tag. By the reactive, or it is more than children props get merged together, and the second one wins. We see that they are passed to the create element function as two different arguments. This strongly suggests to me that the React team made an intentional decision to manually override the children value in the props object with the children argument supplied afterwards. Some student has wondered, was this intentional design by the React team, or it was that more children props get merged together and the second one wins? So if you take a look at this GSX transpile code, you get something like this: the children and the between brackets. So it seems that the React team an intentional decision to manually override the children values of the prop object with children's arguments supplied afterwards. Alright, so they prefer to get anything that is rendered here and supply here rather than whatever is being passed through that. We can take a look at the, well, no, like this. Children as an attribute, and they prefer, and deliberate prefers to go with that. And then you have now the exercise. Extract component. Building a CRM. Let's suppose we're building a CRM, which is a custom relationship manager software. Well, we are writing the markup to display the contact information for 3 contacts, but there is a lot of repetition involved. Let's create a new component, contact card, and use that component for each of these 3 contacts. Accepting criteria. A brand new contact card component should be created and used for each of the 3 contact cards. Props should be created for any bits of information that vary from card to card. Okay. Props should be created for any bit of information that vary from card to card. So this is the accepting criteria. We have written the 3 markup to display the contact information for 3 contacts. But there is a lot of repetition involved. Let's create a new component, contact card, and use that component for each of these contacts. What's the DL? What's the DL? HTML tag is fairly obscure, but a super worthwhile tag. It stands for description list, and it is intended to be used to display key value pairs. For example, many e-commerce platforms will display product detail in this format. Product detail and the description list. Job president, la 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 la. Learn more about this tag. Okay. So well, here what we can do is to now, because I have quite experience with, I can create now a function here called the contact card, right? Where here we are going to receive is now all of this data that we're getting here, right? So what is the data that we're gonna get here? Let's go to define now the data structure here based on this design. Well, we say that here we are going to receive now contact information. We can say this will be now a contact of these collections of elements, where, well, the first will be is the name, known with the Sunita. Alright, so Sunita Kumar. Next one is the job. I don't know what the job is. Alright. Oh, DT and DD. DT and DD. Because here we're gonna render is a list. Alright. We can call this as description. And this description we're gonna render is this list as it is. So you have now the job. Okay. Job of the electrical stream. You got an electrical engineer, alright. I don't want to repeat myself here too much. Electrical engineer. The other is the email. Email here. But you have now sunita.kumar@acme.com. And then we go to the next one, which is pretty much the same here. We can just copy and paste that. Wait, what? Who is this? Like this. Alright. And here say, well, let me know this will be is the, oh my god, not at all. No. Henderson G. Sterling second. Good. Henderson G. Sterling second. That's right. So is that a receptionist? Right. And I prefer to copy is this because it's quite long, their email. And the receptionist, start here, right? And it's a receptionist, receptionist, okay. There is a missing, yeah, there is a missing here. There is a missing element here because this will end with this object. Alright. Enough. Okay. So this will end with this object. And the second object, which is of this shape. Alright. Anyway, you get it. You guess it. The same for this third element. In this case, the third contact here. And that is, well, Ayori Kobayashi. Lord. Ayori Kobayashi. The description is the president, alright, and the other is the Kobayashi Iowa@acme.com. So we got is this, right? Where it's actually rendered is the Kobayashi. So now that we have the data structure here, we can now, well, actually have access to these elements. And how can we do that? Well, by first is we already have now is a structure. So there is no need for us to replicate that. In fact, what we can say here is to copy this, import that, and now call the contact here as a GSX element. Okay, where now here of course must return that, say return this, all right. I prefer to return is this as it is, okay. Like this. And now that we have this, we can say, all right, makes a lot of sense of what we're going to return, and let me is, well, render as it is. Okay, so how can we render this now? Because the element where we're going to iterate is the onl, and here what we can do here is to say something like this. We can get rid of all of this because we already have the content, all right, and then start to recreate is this unordered list. So let's get into that. So how are we going to recreate that? By saying I want to have access to the context, all right, where I want to iterate through each one of them, and because this will be the elements that I'm going to iterate, is it in order here, right? Is in order here. Well, I want now to render is this particular element. What I'm going to have is now the contact element, and render that, right? Which means is that let me display this structure here, okay? This structure here, and its render is now 3 times, but here I want to now is display is the proper name. So I'm going to inject is the into the ESX is the JavaScript expression. All right, this expression is a lot. So now I've correctly rendered that, and then here I'm going to render is the other property here from the contact dot. But here, because I want to now render these collections, I want to say something like this. Well, let me is inside of this render again these collections, all right, such as contact dot description, all right, where I want to map to each one of those elements and apply this transformation that will have now the description. Or instead of doing that, right, I can do something like this. I can do is the destructuring, which is the name and the descriptions, right? And this description is something that I can use here as a way to render that. Okay, that I'm gonna have is the description detail, where here I can say is, well, let's go to now render this. Okay, it's gonna let's gonna render this. It's gonna render this. Absolutely. It's gonna render this. Okay. It's gonna render this. Oh, it's because of this. Exactly. Yeah, it's because of this. And now, let me actually is render this, right? So, because I'm about to render this, that's right, since I'm about to render this, all right, but this description detail does not exist. I can destructure this and say, well, give me now is the job and email, all right, right now here it'll be this, it'll be the job followed by this. What the French stuff is this exactly? Followed by this, where I want to inject is a job followed by the this is email followed by this, which is the email here, right? And that'll be all. Exactly. And this is the value expressions to be evaluated. And I want you to evaluate is this. Oh, what about this? Exactly. This is description. And on descriptions, I want to iterate to all of these elements here. Exactly. And oh, of course, because we already changed that. That's what it is. You got it. And there you got it. This is how it's gonna get rendered. It say no. Okay. What about no? Okay, but I want you to render this. All right. Oh, that's right. It's because of this. Yep. It's because of this. I want to render each individual items. Okay, is the uniqueness of this. You have the DL, and there you got it. Remove this. So be it. And there you got it, right? So now it's getting rendered as it is. This is the DL and DT. A very obscure the description list. This is the description list and description table, description data. So there you got it, right? The description table, the description list, man. And then we'll look at the solution.
So as I look through the markup, I see that I have three chunks of markup that all called on of these people, figuring out what the dynamic or Henderson G. Sterling curious about this. A specific purpose, and that purpose is to be used in a list. But if we really wanted to, there are ways around it. And I'm not going to show you them right now because I don't want to overload you. But rest assured, we will talk about how to create React components that can produce arbitrary tags in a future lesson.
So this is the exercise. This is the solution. All right. The solution code. And if we want to replay that, there you go. We got this. So building a CRM. So let's suppose that we're about to build a CRM, right? And what the DL? This is very obscure and also useful stuff here. And then you got here the solution, right? Or one possible solution. All right, such as this. But I went ahead to do that, and I put myself into that position. So this is creating a bottom. Different colors. Okay, below we have two buttons here. We create a button component and use it to render both buttons. So we got now this. Used to render is both buttons, which is exactly this button and this another button, right? Because their styles are quite the same. The only thing that change is their color, right? I think we can have access to a property called color here.
So the task is to create.
All right. So the tag is a brand new button component. Okay. A brand new button component should be created and used for both buttons. Each button instance should be able to set its own text content, as well as choose a text border color. It is up to you to decide how you want to structure this. So here we have now is the bottom component, where I prefer to go with as a function here, right? And then we have now is to render that specific piece of bottom. So what we can do is to create now a button here that accept this specific HTML, and then somehow assign the value that we're getting from, because the only things that gonna change here is the color based on our spec. Each button instance should be able to set its own text content, as well as choose the text and border color. So because the color border color are the things that are gonna be changed, all right, and anything else will remain the same. What we can do is to say, well, I want you to provide me the color as it is, the background color as it is, or the border color as it is, and that'll be all. Yep, and that'll be all. The rest will be the same. And also, I want you to pass me is the context. Let's say text. Here, what you to receive is that text. So when this component is rendered, all right, or evaluated, it's gonna be parsed to a create React element, all right, where the text, the color, and the border color will be now part of the props in the object. We're gonna create now is a button tag here, and the children's will remain now as empty. Okay, which means that by the time that we want to render this color or this bottom, we want to say, hey, this will be red, so we're gonna call the bottom here, where now this will be is the text is the cancel, the color will be now red, and the border color will be now red as well. And if we want to pass now some context to that, we can is just, or either via the text or via the children, right, render that content in between the open and closing tag, just in our case as it is. Cancel, right, as it is. Good, good. So we have now our bottom here, this bottom that's gonna render that. And yeah, that's it. There is no text that we need to pass down to this. We already passed down through the cancel. And we're gonna do the same now for the other, which is color and border color as black, and to pass that as confirm, right? It's pretty much the same here as it is. So here you say now is confirm. The color here is now black, and the border color is now black. There you go. Question: why this doesn't render? Can we inspect that a little bit? So it says that this bottom stuff that you want to is not outputting anything. Unexpected token here. So let's go to return something. And now that'll be work. Right. So pretty straightforward. Nothing too hard, nothing too fancy, and the whole point of this is that all right, and the whole point of this is that we have now the ability to describe what's going on. See, this is not style button. We are now capable of describe what's going on. And that is huge, bro. And that is huge, bro. And that is huge, bro. Exactly. I prefer two, which each dynamic attribute becomes the props, or synchronizing here with the theme color property. Semantic status, you can do something like this. All right, if this is cancel, check that is. That's interesting. Otherwise, unrecognized value and the weird syntax. I prefer to go with the children. All right. There are 3 solutions here. We have 3 solutions. And the 3 solutions here, which is whether it's solution wire as a dynamic, synchronizing text and border color, all right, and the semantic status props. There is no right or wrong. This just is solutions to this piece of code that I find that are valuable. And the other is this one.
Create a button component, and that component should be used to create. Start with the content, right? How should I make this dynamic? Well, we could add something like value equals cancel, but wouldn't it be nice if our button component was used the same way as the button element, where rather than having an attribute like this, we specify it between the open and close tag, where I can just write cancel inside? Well, that's what the children prop is for. So when I write hello, just as a way to quickly test it. So that's good. We design this component to be as friendly to other developers and to ourselves in the future as possible, right? What is the optimal API for the props to create the best experience than props? So the 2 things are color and border color. So I'm going to grab color, make that a prop, grab border, color. See, the button goes gray now because we're not passing those props. So let's set color equal to red and border color also equal to red. I think it's about time now, actually. We'll create 2 of these elements, and the other one will be green, and it'll include the word confirm. So we can get rid of this other button element. So this works, and I want to stress this is absolutely a valid solution. If you did it this way, you get the gold star, the green check mark, whatever icon of praise is most desirable to you. But there are other ways to do it too. And maybe one of the first little optimizations I would make is, do I really need 2 props for this? Because they're the same value, right? And maybe we want some cases where the border and the text color would be different colors, but you know, it doesn't really look very good. I think in most cases we want to lock these 2 values, keep them in sync. And so maybe what we can do is we can create a theme color prop. And the idea is we'll use this theme color in both places. Down here I'll set theme color to red, theme color to green, and we can get rid of border color since it's not being used anymore. This is also a perfectly valid solution, but not where I'm going to end things. Because I think there's one other thing we can do that, at least in some cases, will produce a better result. Right now, we're specifying the color, right? The actual identifier. There are different colors. We'll use this status to derive the color. So I'll say theme color. Actually, let's use let. And then I'll do it inside an if-else. I'll say if status is equal to cancel, well then our theme color should be red. Otherwise, if status is equal to confirm, then our theme color should be green. And if we pass anything else as a status, that's not one of our listed values, so maybe we'll throw an error and say unrecognized value. Now, we are throwing that error because I'm not actually passing one of those values, so I'll change status to cancel, and I'll change status to confirm. The nice thing about doing things this way is we've created a bit of separation between the semantic meaning of this particular button and the end color, which means if in a few months the design team decides that this red color is a little bit too aggressive for the cancel, maybe we want it to be gray instead, I only have to change it in one place. I don't have to go through the entire app and find everywhere that it sets theme color to red and change it to gray. It gives us much more control by centralizing things in the definition of the component. But, as I say, right, all of these are valid and they all have different trade-offs. There may be some cases where you really do want every button to have control over its own color. So that's not to say this is the perfect answer. They are all perfectly valid. And ultimately, we're just dipping our toes here a little bit into this idea of component design. It's something we're going to talk about much more throughout the course, especially when we talk about component libraries. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an early glimpse into these sorts of thought processes and decisions, but it's absolutely not expected that you're already thinking in these terms. We're in the very first module, for goodness sake. So please don't worry. Ultimately, this is just some ideas to start percolating in the back of your mind.
Exactly. Percolating in the back of your mind. Application structure. Okay. Well, we can move on here to the application structure. The index, in general, there will only be one spot in the entire code base that calls the create root. The app, which is the home base, the models, import and export, and going forward. Again, any other application structure will have that. No matter how big or small, most applications will share a common structure, which is this. This is the application structure. Okay, you need to copy that. What about now? Oh, what? Christ's sake. Okay, copy that. What about now? Application structures, and there you go. Okay. Yeah, it is this. So you're gonna have the index, the apps, and the models. You know, you're gonna have is the index. The index, the app, it's common for projects to have the component here, the app, as well as the models, which is something that we're gonna see that later in other courses. Similar for fragments, and how can we use those fragments here? Oh, exactly. And how can we use those fragments? Which doesn't represent anything. It's just like a normal tag that allow us is to describe is how all of our element is gonna be rendered. So here what it's doing is now creating a React app, create React app with nothing, where their children will have is all of this. Exactly. React.fragment. Sit directly into the container div iRoot. And you have a shorthand for that, which is something that I'm quite familiar with, especially with the application structure. as well as a fragment. Alright. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.